Step number 10, set pivot points. So let me just read this. We need to set the pivot point where the joint would rotate for each body part. By default, when a joint module is created, the pivot point is located at the center of the joint. Once the body part is selected, to change the pivot point location, click on the pivot tool located on the tools bar. So you see over here where you have this crosshair symbol, that is known as your pivot tool. And right here, this is your transfer. You know that this is your animate button. This is your transform button. Down here is your onion skin. This button here is your pivot tool. You see when you click on the pivot tool, your crosshair will change to this and will be able to permanently move the pivot location to where it should be. So let's go over back to Toon Boom. And let us look at. So this is what I meant by whenever you select the drawing, by default, the pivot is located at the center of the drawing. If I was to go ahead now and say, all right, I want to rotate the torso, this is what it would look like. Now, we all know that this is not how the torso should be rotating. What should happen is that, you see this pivot, this little circle thing here is the pivot. This pivot should actually be located right here. So this is where it should be located, so that when we try to rotate it, the torso should rotate like that. However, seeing that now what I just did a while ago was temporarily move the pivot location down to here. Now, if I was to deselect in an empty space and then select the drawing module again, what would happen is that the pivot would go back to the center of the drawing. I want for the pivot position to always be located down here. So what we do, when we go over to our toolbar, we have the pivot tool down here. So we click on the pivot tool and notice what happens. You have this little crosshair symbol that appears. So what we want to do is to move this crosshair symbol down here, and that is us changing the permanent location of the pivot location. Now once that has been set, select back your transform tool to come out of the pivot mode. Now, notice that the pivot is now in this location. If I was to deselect by clicking in this empty area and then clicking on the torso again, notice that the pivot is now located here and no longer located in the center of the drawing. So we can always select the torso and it will rotate like that. And if we press B and go up the hierarchy, the peg pivot is also right there as well. So we're going to go through the different body parts and we're going to set the pivot location appropriately so that the body parts can rotate as how they should. Let us look at the neck. If I select the neck, notice that the pivot location for the neck is right here. If I was to go ahead and rotate the neck, it's rotating like this. Now, we want for the pivot location to be right here, so that when we rotate the neck, it rotates like that. So once again, we select the drawing, select our pivot tool here, and notice it goes to this crosshair thing, and we just set it to rotate right there, and then come out of pivot mode by clicking back on your transform tool. If I deselect and select, the pivot location will now be here. Let us look at the head. The pivot location for the head is located right here. So this is how the head, if you were to rotate the head, this is how it would look if it was to be rotated. So we select the pivot tool and move. Let me just move this over so that we have more space. What I did was to just hide the network view and the timeline view so that we have a better view. Select that so that now the head is rotating like that and it can rotate like that. We'll just select the head, and notice it rotates like this. The ears, I don't think we'll be rotating the ears, but we can maybe move it right here. Let's set the pivot position for the ears right here. We're not going to do any rotation with the ears, but we're just setting it right. The pupil, I would set it to the center of the pupil. Why we set it to the center? Because when we're enlarging the pupil, we want it to enlarge from the center. However, if it's not directly in the center, it kind of affects how it is scaled up. So I would advise moving the pivot location to the center of the pupil. Same thing for the eye. I'd move it over more to the center of the eye. The eyebrow, well, the eyebrow is fine. The mouth is fine. The nose is okay. Let us look at the arm. Now, this is how the arm is rotating. The rotation of the arm should be in this, somewhere within this vicinity right here. So what I would do is that I would move this pivot, this test to see how it should rotate. All right, that looks good. So the pivot should be right here. Use the pivot tool and set it to right there, so that whenever the arm is raised like that. Same thing with the other arm. Use the pivot tool, rotate it right there, test it. Okay, so the arm is like that. The hand, rotate the hand. This is not how the hand should be rotating. No, the hand is a bit tricky. What we have to do, you see this pivot here, we can temporarily move it to test to see how best, where exactly it should be. So I can try right here and see if it rotates appropriately. Well, when the arm is rotated like this, it's giving me this result right here, which is not appropriate. So let us try a different location. Let's try further down. Not quite. All right, that's a bit more, that's a bit closer now. Notice that when this is rotated, we get a nice arc when both of them line up. Somewhere right here. Yes. So what I would do, I would move the pivot somewhere right there. So that when we rotate in the arm, the hand is rotated like that. Same thing with this one, we test to see where exactly can go. Maybe over a little bit. All right, that's fine. Later on, because when we raise the arm, we're going to have to bend it. So that, like when you're bending your elbow, so we're going to use a deformer to bend the elbows. So that's for later on. So, but now we're just focusing on setting up the hand. The thigh, so this is where the pivot is. So I would say put the pivot location up here, so that it rotates like that. Same thing with this leg, the thigh should be up here. Oh, I said move it up some more. Alright, that's much better. Move this one up a bit more. Alright, we're going to move this the leg. I would put the pivot right here. That can rotate like that. Same thing with this leg. Move it here. The foot right here. But the foot rotates like this. This. So now we have our pivot location set. So whenever I select the torso, it rotates like that. The arm, it rotates up like that. So we have all of our pivot positions set.